This is Neil Hopman for Samui Mala. My guest today is Dr. Thomas Goreau from the Global Coral Reef Alliance in Baorak, Thailand. And we're here on Koh Samui, faced with an extreme crisis, coral bleaching, global warming. What can we do?
Well, here in Samui we're in the middle of an extreme high temperature episode that has turned all of the reefs white in the last month and a month and a half. What's happened is that this year, 2010, is already shaping up to be the hottest year in history as far as the actual meteorological measurements go. In fact, NASA has just announced that June was the hottest June on record, and that's the fourth month in a row that that's been the case. So from January to June has been the hottest ever measured. So we're on track for a record high temperature. So it shouldn't be any surprise that we have warm ocean water conditions as well. There's been record heat, in fact, in June in North America, Russia, northern China, and other places. So the heat is really on. What's happened with the ocean is that coral reefs are the most temperature sensitive of all marine ecosystems. It takes only 1 degree above the average temperature in the warmest month for the corals to turn white and lose their color. At that point, they're one step short of death. They're actually severely stressed. They're alive, but if the stress continues, they'll die. If the stress goes away, they might recover. And we've been in that situation for the last month and a half. When it got very warm, the corals suddenly all turned white, and many of them then began to die. So we've lost the most vulnerable species. Many of them are completely gone. The good thing is that in the last few days, the temperatures have begun to cool down about in the last week. And in fact, just in the last few days, we've seen very significant recovery. So it'll be another month or so before we know how much we've lost. Okay. My suspicion is it's going to be a minority here of the corals, although certain species will have lost entirely, the most vulnerable species, but the majority will probably survive.
Oh, great.
Yeah. On the other side of town, it's been worse. The temperatures got hot earlier. They cooled down before, but they were hot longer there than they were here. And they're probably lost the majority of the corals on the Andaman seaside. Here we've had a very close call. If it hadn't basically fairly unexpectedly cooled down in the last few weeks, we could have lost most of the corals here too if it had stayed warm. What saved us actually is this typhoon that's hitting Vietnam right now. Right. And this cool weather that we have here, where we've got clouds and rains that are long overdue because it's been such a terrible drought here in Samui. These rains actually are part of that typhoon system of the water that's being sucked into that typhoon that's hitting Vietnam. Right. So that's given us some relief, and we're probably over the crisis for this year. But that doesn't mean that it won't happen next year, the following years. So this year is probably going to be the worst high temperature impact on coral reefs in Samui ever. Because 98, the impacts again were worse on the other side of Thailand than here. But it could happen again and again.
And what can we do about it with Baorak?
Well, the thing is, we can't do anything about the temperature unless the world as a whole chooses to control the problem, which is excess CO2 from fossil fuels, and the world is nowhere near ready for that. In terms of what we can do, since we can't control temperature, all we can do is try to grow corals that grow faster and more resistant to high temperatures. And there's only one method known that does that, and that's what we call the Baorak method. It's a method we're using right here in Koh Samui. Baorak Thailand, which is a group that I work with, that Thomas Sarkissian is the head of, who's got projects at about half a dozen places around Koh Samui and Koh Tao, who are growing corals using little trickle electrical charges, like a trickle charge that would be put on a battery, for instance. And what that does is a couple things. That speeds up the growth of the coral, but in addition, corals that get the electricity bleach less, and we see that very clearly here on our projects in Koh Samui. Right. When the conditions begin to improve, they recover much more quickly. So they've got more energy, and they turn around and start healing again very quickly. Right. And the third thing is that with severe high temperatures, we get much higher survival, much lower mortality. So here in Samui, it's been very exciting in the last few days because we've been looking at the projects and we've seen that the reefs themselves are beginning to recover, but what's more exciting is that the projects that we're doing, the corals are recovering even faster. So we think we finally have a method that we can use to kind of try to protect corals against bleaching and rescue corals that otherwise might die from bleaching.
That's great to hear. There's some hope, yeah?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Good news.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Goreau. I really appreciate you coming here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. My pleasure to work here. Yeah.
Fantastic.